the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AVWeek, episode 191, recorded Friday, April 17th, 2015. Mickey Bytes.
Ready.
AVWeek.
Performing scan.
Week.
Online.
This is AVWeek. This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audio-visual news and information. My name is Tim Albright. I'm your host. Welcome. Good afternoon. It is Friday. If you're watching this live, if you're not, well, then it's whatever day of the week it is. With us this week is Mr. George Tucker from World Stage. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much. 15 games to go. That's all I've got to say.
George is talking about hockey, of course, and he's a Rangers fan, so we'll get the other side of that. Miss Dawn Mead, who's a Pittsburgh Penguin fan, and they lost last night. How are you, ma'am?
Other than the loss, very good, thanks.
Very good. She is from Net AV. Also with us is Matt D. Scott from Omega Audio Video in London, Ontario. How are you, brother?
I'm doing great. I'm outside, finally. So I'm happy.
All right. And last but not least, I'm going to fanboy here for a second. I've watched this guy for a little while. His name is Robert Heron from Heron Fidelity. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm terrific. Thank you for inviting me, Tim.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. Robert's been on, nearly every tech show I think I've ever watched, from Twit to Techzilla to AVNation to, he's done a lot of stuff. Probably one of the smartest guys that I follow, at least. I don't know him personally, but when it comes to HD and signals and calibrating displays and stuff like that. A number of years ago, you broke the news to me about Panasonic getting out of plasmas and this, that, and the other. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for the compliment.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to cover a couple of things here. First of all, before we get started, Infocom's coming up, and there's a couple of awards ceremonies, or our award seasons. One is the Women AV folks, our buddy Jennifer Willard. You've got about a week or so if you want to get a woman who has helped mentor you or someone else to help out. You can have the nominations there. It's womenav.com. Also, Infocom has extended their awards for Young AV. Actually, they have a Women in AV as well, CTS holder, this, that, and the other. So check that out at infocom.org. You can nominate your favorite person. So, all right, the Apple Watch is going on sale. They are having their first pre-orders have gone over 1 million. For the first couple weeks. And Robert, we'll start with you on this one, simply because what we're going to do is we'll start with you on this one because what I want to get from you is what exactly this means for the wearable space to have these pre-sales for Apple, this Apple product at over 1 million.
I think it shows specifically that there's a tremendous interest for people who own an iPhone or another Apple product that it can interface with. However, I think on the hardware side, it is really a first-generation product. And compared to other wearables that are out there right now that have a little more maturity, a larger app base, although that could change rather quickly in Apple's case, that whole limitation on power and having to recharge a device less than 24 hours. And Apple's claiming an 18-hour power window, basically, for keeping the device powered. That's not even a full day. And compare that to something like Pebble's first-generation wearable, where it can go almost a week, really, between charges. That I think is going to be the big one. I think a lot of people are interested in this. Clearly, the sales numbers have shown it in terms of just how popular the device itself is. However, I say in about 6 months, you're going to have a lot of these just sitting on dresser drawers and on nightstands, relatively unused.
That's awfully expensive if you buy the gold one. I have something.
Oh, no. I mean, it's going to be fun for a lot of people, but the day in, day out, do you really want another device you're charging less than a day, every day, to keep it functional? And, I mean, granted, that's not such a huge deal, I guess, if you're going to do it along with your phone, but I am not convinced, though, that these are where they need to be yet, at least in terms of the power requirements and for, I think, just day-to-day. However, I will say having a wearable in your hand that just simply takes my eyes off my phone for even a little while is great. Just something that I can quickly say, oh, I just got a text, I just got a phone call, here's who it is. I don't have to reach for my mobile device. I think those kind of usage things are going to be great, and I think that's something Apple users are looking for. But I think they dropped the ball in terms of just how long the device will actually function in terms of before it needs to be recharged.
Well, and that's something they've had a problem with for a while, is battery life in general. Real quickly, I'd keep with Robert for a second. Does the fact that J.J. Abrams was wearing one yesterday at Star Wars Celebration mean anything, or is that just him being cute?
He's hip.
He's hip.
He's on the cutting edge, and I think it's going to be it's a status symbol as much as anything else. These aren't cheap devices,
no, and
they could be very expensive. So, and you put that together with the engineering's beautiful. The Apple hardware in general is fantastic. I just think there's just a huge interest initially that will quickly fade, unless there's either a breakout app that's just the must-have thing, which I can't see that happening right off the bat, at least for the first 6 months. And then likewise, I can't wait to see in about 6 to 8 months how reviews go, or are people still using them on a regular basis? And I hope I'm proven wrong. I'd like to see wearables take off, but I don't need another device that I have to plug in every night in order to keep it functioning.
All right. Robert just gave me a very nice segue into the next part of the story. George, our buddies over at Crestron have already started teasing their app for the wearable, for the iPhone, or the Apple Watch. So is this, where are they headed, and where do they think that this is going to go? The fact that they're already touting an automation and control app for the smartwatch.
Well, part of me was curious because what they showed was someone running with it. So it was a picture of a young woman running. Yeah. So that's basically what your wearables are, right? The health, the metrics for all that kind of stuff. I'm not quite clear. We've talked about this in the past, where my dream for such a watch would be something that knows where you are, like an RFID that understands velocity, where you're going and direction. And that I could see being something with a bunch of sensors in the house. It knows where you're going and when to turn lights on and off. Yes, and they'll have the standard stuff. Yes, close the door, close the garage. I can see that. Was it the Schlegel or whatever the lock company is? You can, did I turn it off? Yes, okay. Other than that, I don't know. The interface is really tiny. We've said this before about when first iPhones came out, but still, that's a tiny interface for some kind of automation, beyond the very basic stuff. So I'm unclear, very unclear.
All right, Mr. Matt Scott, you live and breathe in residential as well as House of Worship. Is this something that, I'm not going to ask if you're going to make it available to your clients, but is this something you're going to actively engage them in or with?
Well, we've already been asked for them, as far as not to supply them, but how can they integrate them? How can we use them? Because even at the original keynote when they announced it, Lutron was one of the players that showed the new Caseta line of lighting control and how it can, again, work with that to turn lights on, turn lights off, yada yada yada. I don't know. I do kind of feel that this is one of those things that, in a couple of months, a lot of them will sit on the shelves, just like most of the other wearables that my clients have had over the years. I was in one of my clients' offices yesterday, and his Pebble was just sitting charging. I asked him if he was just charging it for today, and he said, no, it's probably been there for 2 weeks. I don't know. I'd like to see them succeed. It's definitely been the biggest push for wearables that I've seen, just mainly because of Apple's user base. But as far as clients wanting them and wanting to actually do true automation with them, again, without some form of location services or something, I'm just not exactly clear on how that's supposed to function. Outside of, again, maybe utilizing Siri, again, to interface into that, locating the app, popping it up and saying, Siri, turn my house off, rather than navigating through, again, the app process. But I really don't know. I haven't ordered one yet, but I will probably pick one up in the next little bit.
You are my favorite fanboy. I did just say that.
But it's true. You kind of have to, especially my residential user base is probably 75% Apple. And out of that, especially with my higher end clients, most of them, I will say, will purchase one either for themselves or one of their kids, and will be tasked with, helping them learn how to use it. So without us actually having one in the office to mess around with, that becomes troubling.
Okay, so Don, Mr. Scott does bring up a really good point. From the commercial side, is this something where integrators need to start at least buying one or two of them to get them in the office and see how they work? Just so when the CEO walks in with his fancy schmancy new Apple Watch, the integrators can say, "Oh yeah, we know how to work that," and do. There you go.
I'm sure every integrator has at least one Apple fanboy or apologist that would be glad to do that as their own little hobby. First of all, disclaimer, as if it's not obvious, I'm not an eye person, so I will not be buying one of these anytime soon. But I think on the commercial front, it's going to be more of a fad or more of a, oh, gee, isn't this cool? And like Robert said, for the first 5 minutes or the first couple of days, this is the best thing ever. And then we just kind of forget about it. I mean, let's be honest. Most of us on the call here, Matt is an exception, are at least Gen X. We've spent the last 20 years forgetting how to wear a watch and not bothering with them because our phone takes that place. And, it's a pain to get it out and look at it, but I'm not going to go back to wearing a watch. It's hard enough for me to remember to wear my Fitbit, and speaking as a woman, not to be a stereotype or anything, but I have yet to see a single smartwatch or wearable device that is in any way elegant or attractive. I mean, yeah, Fitbit or some of the other wearable fitness things have, Tory Burch designer bands that you can get for them. But for the most part, they're clunky and they're ugly. And even as a tech geek, I don't want to wear that.
Yeah.
I'll hold out for that Cricket or Circuit or whatever it's called, the little bracelet one that projects your phone onto your arm that's in development. I'll hold out for something like that that's sexy and wearable and elegant and not ugly before I'll waste money on something like this. Again, not an eye person. I'm sure there are women listening to this podcast or watching that are like, I already have 3 on pre-order. That's fine. But I don't see it really being a player in the commercial space or my personal world at all.
Oh, okay.
I think the one thing to keep in mind, though, and again, I'm not going to jump out and say it's going to be the best product ever because I don't think this generation will be. Apple has had a lot of success with these types of things that nobody else has had. When they brought the iPhone, it was, oh, this is big, it's going to take forever to recharge, yada, 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 and it became the #1 selling phone in the world. Same with the iPad. I'm not saying that this will be that same success level, but, if you want a company, and I said this quite a few months ago on the show, if you want wearables to be cool and you want them to be a mass market product, you need Apple or Google to make one. And Google hasn't really stepped up in that realm, so Apple did, and who knows? It'll be interesting to watch, as we've all kind of speculated, in 6 months where this product is. Or in 8 months when they refresh it and get everyone to buy another one.
Well, let me ask a incredibly sexist question, and I'm going to admit that before I even say it comes out of my mouth. Is it something, and Dawn, this is for you because I have no way to answer this. Is this something where they need to make one for the female market, or is it just it is what it is, and if you want one, there it is?
I mean, now granted, I'm a tech geek and I'm one of you guys, so I'm not like super uber girly. But speaking on behalf of my gender, I don't know that it would work as a geek. Speaking on behalf of my gender, I don't know that it would work to make a girly one. Because traditionally, girly watches are smaller, thinner, more streamlined.
That's where I was going.
If it's small and too thin and too streamlined, you're not going to be able to use the bloody thing. I mean, it is, in effect, an interface. It's a user interface. It has to, as it is, I'm not sure how people with fat fingers are using these things on their wrist because it is a smaller screen. Some people have problems with phones. So if you get too much smaller, it's going to be not usable, not functional, and what's the point at that point? So, again, it's my pet project I'm keeping an eye on in the Kickstarter world or to see if it's fiction or not, but something like the little projection-based Cricket or whatever, I got to look it up and see what it's called, but the bracelet that projects
we've
your
all seen
interface
it.
on your arm.
Yeah, where you flip it.
Yeah. Something
Apple
like that would be small. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Apple does have that one advantage, though, of having Siri built into the majority of their mobile products, and that's one thing that Pebble really doesn't have, is a way to do that voice interaction through that wristband or through that watch itself. That might be the one way that they'll be able to make it a more effective product right off the bat, rather than have to deal with a tiny display. If it's something that you could simply talk into without having to pull your phone out, and although you're gonna, do you want it then playing back through your wrist and dealing with that kind of interaction? It'd be nice if it would just go right to your ear, but that's not here yet. But just having that voice interaction with the mobile device, I think, gives them an advantage over some of the other products, at least until you get into like what Motorola is doing with their product. And I'm sure it has a microphone built in as well that can interface with Android-based handsets, or any other handset for that matter. But I would say that having Siri is going to be one of the bigger things that they should try to leverage at least, and that could then provide all the hooks needed for, be it a Control 4 setup or anybody else's interface, making it just that much more effective or easier for a wider variety of people to be able to interact with the software itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
For Americans who speak in a clearly American accent with no regional dialects or slang terms. I have a lot of friends in Scotland, and if you've ever seen the video of Siri with the Scottish guy, it's a classic, but it's true. The voice interface doesn't recognize a lot of things or a lot of accents that people say that frustrates the heck out of my friends across the pond. I'll tell you that much.
I'm just happy I could call Tess Trueheart now.
No response.
There's a Gen X reference. I'm sorry.
It is. All right. LG is forging ahead, and I am forging ahead with a story on OLED technology. Interesting thing, and this is something that we've talked about a lot on this show, is the different types of technologies. Real quickly, so LG and Samsung have kind of, but they've been at each other's throat, let's be honest about it. This is actually one area where they haven't, because Samsung has said, timeout on OLED. We've had some issues. They've had some hiccups here. LG, on the other hand, is saying, yay, let's go get them. They're actually looking for partnerships currently in Japan and in China to get their OLED up and running. Dawn, where does that put? Well, first of all, what does LG know that Samsung doesn't know when it comes to OLED, or what do maybe they have up their sleeve that makes Samsung say, never mind on the OLED?
If I knew that, I would have invested and made a bunch of money by now. Because and for Robert's benefit, Tim and I are both OLED fanboys, fangirls. I've been waiting for this technology to become a reality and just bring one of those flexible, rolled up screens home and put it on my wall in all glorious 80 inches or whatever. We're ways away from that, but for over 10 years now, we've been waiting for OLED to become a viable commercial technology. I'm still waiting. It's still not in my living room. I'm still disappointed, but it makes me happy every time we get a story like this that someone is forging ahead with it. I've got some small OLED screens that I use for marketing purposes that are fantastic. They're gorgeous. I love them. I want the big one. I want the dream I've been waiting for over a decade now. And if LG brings it to me, LG is my favorite this week. If Samsung turns around and brings it to me, they're my favorite. Somebody, damn it, bring me my OLED screen.
Well, and I think that's the point. There is Samsung isn't your favorite because they said no, thank you.
Two different technologies too, in terms of how they're going about manufacturing the panels themselves between Samsung and LG. LG decided immediately to say, you know what, we're not going to deal with making individual red, blue, and green OLED materials. We're going to make one flat white material and then put a standard color filter, just like they do with an LCD panel. Whereas Samsung, from the very get-go, said we want to perfect red, blue, green OLED materials and then make each pixel emissive in that case, rather than have to deal and eliminate the color filter altogether. And that proved to be just, I guess, an insurmountable challenge, or an unprofitable one, most likely, where they just said, I don't know of any other manufacturer, at least with the numbers I've seen, that actually turns a profit on televisions other than Samsung. And it's minuscule what they actually make on that. But I think when it came to the OLED, they said they'd take a year or two off just to see what happens. And in the meantime, LG has simply forged ahead with sizes up to 77 inches for this year. Granted, the pricing is still expensive, but if you look at even over the last 2 years, everything's about half. The new 4K panels, of course, are going to be the most premium priced, but otherwise, this will be the year of high dynamic range content, and maybe certain TVs handle that metadata that will be embedded in these upcoming formats a little bit better than others. But I think when you talk about utter contrast, though, Don made that point about what makes OLED look so good. It's how dark black looks, and it's fantastic. And LG has generally, with their OLED panels, good out-of-the-box color. Some of their video processing is always a little, what's going on? But they have been providing lots of updates for the current generation of OLED panels that seem to address those issues as well. But it's the TV I want. I'm sad to see plasma gone, and now that OLED can do even better contrast, better brightness, and better energy efficiency. So I too want that in my living room next, if I have to pick one display technology right now, at least over LCD.
Well, yeah, I knew there was a reason.
LCD's good, but it ain't no OLED. So.
No.
Isn't there also an issue though that OLED has a less of a lifespan? They say that some of the reds and some of the other parts of it will not last nearly as long.
Well, compared to what though, George? Compared to plasma, or LED?
In general, to LED especially.
Like with the original Sony XEL1, that 11-inch panel they put out, blue would age faster than red and green, and so over time the display became more and more yellow. So you spent thousands of dollars for that original 11-inch beauty, and it was gorgeous. However, that was one of the things that, in particular, probably why LG went with a white OLED material as a backlighting system, compared to Samsung working on perfecting red, blue, and green and getting the longevity to where it needed to be. And the last I heard, they have it. Blue isn't as degrading as it used to be over time, but I think the costs just aren't there. And I'm really curious. I've heard now Samsung's contemplating coming back into the OLED space, so I'll be really curious to see what they do next year. I mean, their current generation of flagship TVs, that JS series with their quantum dot technology and other things, those are fantastic looking sets, but those aren't cheap either. Those are almost, especially with their flagship full array backlit model, the 9500, that's getting into OLED pricing, and
you should see it in Canada.
Oh, can only imagine. So there's a lot of cool flagship options this year, and I still say OLED's, just for the pure eye candy, is the one everyone will want, but the prices are going to keep people away, especially at least with the new 4K panels.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
George, to be fair, people said the same thing about plasma when it was plasma versus LCD, that, the plasmas burn in, the plasmas are terrible, the plasmas have horrible longevity. And since my OLED is not on my living room wall, my Pioneer PDP 503 CMX is still hanging there all these years later, and it's just starting to get a pink spot in the middle. We're talking about replacing it, but it still looks good. So, take these, it's not as good quality-wise, with a grain of salt in some regards, because for what it gives you versus its couple of drawbacks, I'll still take the OLED.
Well, and to keep in mind, especially again in the residential space, we're still seeing people upgrading panels now every 5 to 7 years at the maximum, or at least shifting locations and upgrading their main panel.
Ones, yeah.
Most of our clients are bumping every 4 years as far as down the chain. So if the OLED only lasts, say, 6 years before it's really questionable, and that owner bumps it into a secondary viewing location or a third viewing location, does it really matter? And at that point, do they really care about how much it costs 4 or 5 years ago? Like, I have a plasma I bought at dealer, like $3,200, that I still have and still use, but I don't complain about the price point anymore.
No,
well, not too much.
Well, not too much. Yeah, that's a valid point. So. All right, from HairInfidelity.com. Robert has a website. It's actually where I get a lot of stuff. The article is called Deal Alert. Talks about the fact that the 2015s are hitting the stores, hitting Amazon, hitting other places. That means that we have a glut of 2014s, which means that there's a number of different deals on here. The interesting thing, a couple to point out, there's a 50-inch Vizio for $530. You can get a 65-inch LG for almost, basically $1,600. George, we'll kick this one off with you. Where is, we just talked about price with Matt. Where is the price? Where is the magical area that we're going to land. But by the time everything is said and done and the dust settles, you go out to Amazon or where have you. What should you expect to pay for a 40 or 50 inch?
That's. You asked me 4 years ago, and it would have been a different story. Ask me now. I think you're looking at the $500 to $1,000. That's your tipping point. It's okay.
Okay.
At least I'm looking from both perspectives, not just as selling as an integrator, but also just walking into Best Buy and buying one. I think for that price, for that size, that clarity, you would go, okay, that seems fair. Ask me 2 years ago, and I'm like, no, $300 is all I got, baby, and I'm going to buy what that affords. And scale that. To that end, though, I'm going to take our guest here to task for a moment. Listed in the beginning of this deal alert is that it's shot for quality 1080p or 4K UHD. This is something that integrators chomp at the bit about, my friend. They are not the same thing to us, and it's one of those marketing things that we get really, really tight panties about.
What?
No,
They're not the same.
Maybe your panties are tight. I'm just frustrated.
Yeah. Well, George is older. His panties are older, so.
No, but that was CEA's how they want it branded. And personally, I think it should just be called ultra high definition. I think the 4K should be left for the true 4K devices out there, especially when you talk about the difference between those 256 extra pixels between 4K and how 4K in cinema, at least, it's a variety of about at least three different formats that I'm aware of in terms of the pixel resolution. So, yeah, and when I look at projectors like Sony's new 350, that's a true 4K panel device, or it uses true 4K panels within the projector itself. Yeah, I wish there was more definition, but today I was listening to an ad on TV, and they weren't even using UHD. They were just calling every TV a 4K TV. And I know that drives integrators crazy, and you kind of have to just look at it, though, on the consumer side of things. It's all too complicated already. The naming convention is horrible, but and everyone just assumes, oh, it's 4K, it's 4 times the number of pixels. That's what
Bingo.
That means. It's like, no, it has nothing to do really with that. It was more about the horizontal resolution, and compared to where we were using 1080p before, which referred to the vertical resolution. And could we make it any more complicated for people out there? And that's just, if I do anything or I use any kind of terminology, there's usually a reason for it, and it's, yeah, I should probably just write an article about the madness of it. Actually, I did something specifically for when CEA made that decision for the official naming and the branding for 4K UHD. I did write up an article about that, and just to let people know, it's like, look, I'm tired of going back and forth. I'd prefer if we would have just stuck to UHD at 2160p, but it didn't happen. So people hate 2160p, I think, more than they do saying 4K.
It doesn't
4K.
roll off the tongue. That's why.
It's the new math.
Okay, so hang on for a second. We've kind of jumped stories, which I have no problem with, right? I have no problem with it. But I'm going to bring this one in here because our buddy Chris Janes runs Mersive, and I kind of busted his chops a little bit on this very subject. This is a picture, if you're watching the video, this is a picture of the Solstice Pod, which is, Solstice is the Solstice Pod, quote unquote, is purpose-built for wireless media streaming. Talks about native support for 4K. And yet it has a Ultra HD and a 4K piece on the box. So here's what I did. I actually, did something reporter-ish, and I said, okay, Chris Janes, what's the deal with this? So this is the response we got. Quote unquote, the Solstice Pod gives users another option who want to enable space wireless communications but don't have existing PCs. It goes on to talk about some more about the thing. The importance. This is important because software involves faster dedication than hardware, and when you combine Solstice with a hardware platform, that is driven by large consumer trends. The result is a very high performance package that is low cost. We and our AV resellers think the pod will allow Solstice to address tens of millions of meetings rooms and classrooms. The 4K Ultra HD refers to the consumer version of 4K, which is an interesting statement. Displays that run at 3840 by 2160 and not the cinematic, to Robert's point, standard that is 4096 by 2160. We felt it was important to support the more common 16:9 aspect ratio of 4K television, which I actually agree with. So, from our buddy Chris Janes, and Chris says, good luck with the show. So thanks, Chris. To Chris's point, they're going after what Robert said. It's the CEA. It's the Consumer Electronics, and that's I have no problem making them the bad person here, right? From as far as geeks and videophiles who say give me my true 4K. However, we do have like 5 different resolutions. We even have one technically that's 5,000. So are we going to call that 5K if we're going to get real technical here? So George, you kick this off. I'll kick it back to you. Where are we going to call it? Is Robert White right? Are we going to just do UHD?
Divide by pi.
Oh, jeez.
It's already out of the box. It's a Pandora's box of nonsense, and this is why I sort of brought it up. It's nobody knows the difference. Half the integrators kind of know the difference. It's divide by pi, or what is it, divide by 0? Is that the joke as well?
Yes.
They've got to rebrand it. They got to make it 4K. I think everything's 4K, and it's Cinema 4K and Home 4K, and everybody will get that. You've got 2 levels. 2 lines, no waiting.
Jeez. All right, Robert, from your standpoint, is it just UHD or 4K, or what are we doing?
I stick with what CEA is going with just because of that. Because when you get into the higher end, when you get into projection in particular and cinema production, those are beyond what the typical consumer is ever going to experience. And in terms of the products we're dealing with today, the line's been drawn in the sand, at least in terms of just the naming of the format. Like I said, I kind of wish they would have stuck with that vertical resolution perhaps, but maybe 1080p was they didn't want to make it any more complex than that. So I think just saying 4K, people get their head wrapped around that. And if we want to educate people beyond that, it's like, hey, look, when you go into a commercial theater that has a 4K projector, that is actually a little bit different in terms of the color performance, in terms of the actual resolution, and when you talk about cinema in terms of crafting the content, you have different aspect ratios there as well, and it is in itself its own subject that could be studied a little bit and brought. But as far as consumers go, it's a 16:9 format. It is kind of confusing also that most of the 4K TVs I deal with right now actually do accept the full 4096 by 2160 or whatever resolutions. They actually will take in the full 4K format in addition to the UHD formats as well. But as far as consumers go, everything they're dealing with is going to be that 3840 by 2160 content and the streaming materials that they're receiving. And although I will give Netflix credit, when you are watching a 4K stream, it does say 2160p. It doesn't actually say anything else. I don't believe it does. Although when you go through the guide, I think it says Ultra HD there.
Yeah,
and so it's a little crazy. Yeah, like the CEA is trying, but apparently
they've got a lot on
there's a lot of ambiguity or just a little bit of wishy-washiness in terms of how we name things. But it never makes it easier for people to get it through their head that, as much as I hate it, I like the fact that at least 4K and 4 times the resolution of 1080p sort of align, even though they don't, there's no direct correlation there. It's still at least it's a talking point where you can get the concept across to someone, and then get beyond the fact that we're not even talking about compression, distribution, bit rates, audio quality, and other aspects of it that are equally as important in terms of just straight pixel resolution or contrast. People ignore that one. Going back to OLED just for a second, that is arguably the biggest piece of eye candy out there right now, is either having a super bright display in a bright room environment or in a dark room environment, having something that can do that epic black level that just draws you into it. And those, to me, beyond what we're going to name, the format, most people, I'm not going to say that. I was going to say that some people couldn't tell the difference between 2K and 4K content on most TVs anyway, but that's disingenuous.
There are some people that can't tell the difference between 720 and 1082, so that's
And in this compressed video streaming world we're living in right now, it's harder and harder to do. So I still am very thankful for things like the Blu-ray format, and hopefully looking forward later this year we'll have something that can do similar quality at a 4K, be it full 4K or consumer 4K. content quality. So
yeah.
And Robert just
year.
brought up Robert just brought up a point I've been saying on this show for a couple of years now, is we live in a schizo world, because at the same time we're demanding higher and higher higher and higher quality at our video, and even higher and higher quality in our high fidelity, perfect sound with lossless everything and just perfect acoustics. We're listening to compressed MP3s and we're watching, pixelated YouTube videos that we think are fantastic. And it's like the middle ground has been lost, and we're in an era of extremes, both on the audio front and the video front. I just think of Ozzy, to paraphrase him from that phone commercial. How many bloody K are there anyway? Just where are we going here, folks? Figure it out.
Absolutely. All right. Our next little story here is somewhat about 4K-ish and display technology. I think I know what Robert's answer is going to be on this, but we'll still ask that nonetheless. Silicon Core and NAB this week released their LED displays for broadcast. And what I want to ask is real quickly, and Matt, we'll start with you because you do a fair amount, especially with House of Worships. What do we think is the best display for broadcast video? When we're talking about broadcast environments where you're doing video production. Is it LED? Is it OLED? Is it AMOLED? Is it plasma? What is it? What is the best one here?
We used to love plasma for it, but especially in the House of Worship market, it has gone very heavily LED. Again, mainly because OLED has not been readily available. Although I know we've done some systems that have some of the little 7-inch OLED monitors for CCU control, color correction control, and whatnot, and they're fabulous. At the same time, most of those facilities are doing production with, finished production with Apple Cinema displays. And, again, it's kind of all over the map depending on who you talk to. And honestly, what they can afford. If they can afford to put some LEDs in, that's what they're going to put in, whether that's the best or not. It's such a hard one to look at anymore, especially specifically coming from my House of Worship background. It always comes down to the budget point.
All right, Miss.
Which I realize didn't answer your question at all.
No, you said sort of. You said it depends, which is not really an answer.
Are
but
you
it's an
running
answer.
for office? Is that what's happening?
Yes, he is. In Canada.
I am.
I'm going to stay on message.
All right, Dawn, from your standpoint.
That's a great question. Let me go over here.
No. From your standpoint, what's the best one for broadcast?
I'm sorry, did you ask me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. I asked you over the rude Canadian.
Everyone's talking. Honestly, we don't do a ton of broadcasts. Whatever looks and works the best in the situation. I don't believe that there's ever a single technology that works in every situation, because over the years, the integrators I've worked for, we've come up with perfect formulas for boardrooms, and then we go into a boardroom where that formula just does not work, and we have to use a more custom solution. Or we come up with a perfect formula for situation rooms. Same thing. You're always going to find that one guy, that one place, that one room that's going to defy your expectations and require something completely different. So I try to keep an open mind on these things and say, for that guy, OLED is the exact answer for broadcast. But for this guy over here or this room, it's not going to work. And here's why. And just try to stay flexible, because as soon as you say this is the answer, it's not the answer.
Okay.
At least in our experience.
All right. George, from a staging standpoint and your other various sundry uses, what's the best one, do you think?
That's really not an answer that you can make definitively. It depends on what you're shooting with, where you're shooting, what environment you're in. I mean, plasma and LED work just fine, depending on where you are. The big studios use a lot of that. OLED would be a lovely thing. But this seems to be shooting to be the ultimate, if not the penultimate then. Saying, hey, we're not, where the end game is, but we are very, very close. They do help in what they say they're building, reduce a lot of the concerns broadcasters have about moiraying and artifacts that can occur based on how it interacts with the camera and broadcast compression, etc. So it's not really a definitive answer. You have to sort of know your environment, know what kind of studio setup, and what you're doing camera-wise. While broadcast can be very rigid in how everybody does it, you go from the studio to the live NFL game in that little broadcast booth, it's all different. You got to sort of make that assessment. So there's lots of answers out there, and that's the reason why.
All right, Mr. Heron, you have the last word on this. What is the best solution as far as displays for broadcast?
I think in this case, it's good to point out to people that this is LEDs, as in not an LCD panel.
Yes.
This is actually, they're saying with the latest generation, they're down to 1.5 millimeter per pixel. I'm assuming that's hopefully per sub-pixel maybe, or maybe not. Maybe that is then that would be split 3 ways. Sony showed off an LED prototype at CES a couple years ago, and it was fantastic. And one advantage that this type of direct LED display would have over a standard LCD panel would be off-axis viewing, uniformity. You can control the binning of these LEDs very carefully, and other than when you get into where you have to reduce the brightness of the display for some reason, and you might get into where the power management or flicker artifacts that occur with displays like that. When on most typical LEDs, basically, if you're going to reduce the brightness, you're simply increasing the strobe time, basically, on it. So that could be an issue, but I think as far as just uniformity, the directionality of the brightness would be something I'd be curious to see how it looks off axis and things like that. But in a broadcast environment, typically everything's aimed very carefully. Yep. You would have great control over the lighting in particular for the panel across edge to edge, corner to corner. And it should make for a fantastic display. I'm curious about longevity. I mean, I assume that their designs are as good as anyone's, and these should last a good long time. But also with heat production as well. Typically with a lot of these panels, they require good cooling. I'm also thinking of like outdoor LED displays as well, but like for ballparks and things like that, where it's a whole different issue. But it seems to me it'd be a great replacement for plasma with better characteristics, especially with the difficulty of doing good uniformity with an LCD panel. And it could be a win-win, and I hope it's successful. I don't see these necessarily being used in production environments where you're sitting in a darkened room doing careful, either editing or coloring of video content maybe. But there's no reason I guess they couldn't. I go back to that demo that Sony showed off with the crystal LED technology. Yes. Mm-hmm. It looked fantastic. However, what's the cost of that? On the consumer side, I don't think that's coming anytime soon. I think that's even more expensive than an LED or an OLED panel would be. But it is kick butt technology, and I love LEDs in general as a lighting technology and as outdoor display technology. And if they can make it work in the stage of indoor AV production, all the better.
Well, then, and Sony just kind of dropped that whole crystal thing after that CES, didn't they? I mean, they said, here's this great new technology we have, and 6 months later, at the very next trade show, they said, yeah, never mind. Here's an actual, a real LED.
Sony is always a couple years ahead of where they probably should be in terms of products, and they'll make things that they basically, within their own line of consumer products, created a 4K ecosystem that included everything from the cameras to the final display with a content delivery system, and it was all extremely expensive, but they put it together and even expanded color initially with some of their technologies, and a lot of it was just a little too soon, or it was like, I have to buy all in with Sony and I can't mix and match other devices. So I love them for what they do, and they push the boundaries, especially in consumer electronics, but it doesn't necessarily make for a very successful product run on certain things. So,
but it makes for a very smug dawn. I don't know, Tim, if you go back to the AVWeek right after that show in January of 2 years ago, 1 year ago, whenever that was, and you were all upset that ROLED was going away because Sony came out with this Crystal HD, and I said, it's not going to last. OLED is coming. It's not gonna replace ROLED.
Nope.
Thank you.
I think the biggest challenge for OLED will be in the next couple of years will be the quantum dot technology, and currently it's done as an enhancement for LCD panels, but that's really kind of a side business. the direct emission, where you can do a direct electron stimulation of a quantum dot material, have it be emissive, has the potential then to give OLED a real run. But those panels aren't out yet, and I am really looking forward to seeing what happens, because if that can be done, and as far as I know, quantum dot production is cheap relatively compared to what they can do with OLED materials, and if you can create the right backplane to simply stimulate those particles in such a way, compared to how they're doing it currently with just enhancing an LED backlight system, that's going to be game changing, or at least it'll be another great option for a thin flat panel design that goes toe to toe with OLED in terms of brightness and black level, and that's something I'm really looking forward to seeing in the next few years.
Well, and that's the whole thing about emissive versus transmissive technology. Not to sidetrack on that, but Robert makes a good point. When you have emissive technology, you're able to create the blacks. You're able to create the reds and the greens. With transmissive, which and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, because all three of you are smarter than I am. Transmissive, I've always explained to people, is basically a digital stained glass window, right? Where you have this light source and it's going through some sort of membrane that's actually the picture. How are you going to create black with light? That's always been my contention. That's why I love plasma so much. That's why I love OLED. That's why I love the quantum dot stuff, is because the light source is actually creating the picture, right? And Robert makes a good point about that. That's why it's just the emissive technology in general, that technology that is just better in general. So, all right.
We often bash Sony on this show because from an integrator's point of view, they really haven't done a heck of a lot to make us happy, and we've we've made fun of them. But Robert brings up a good point. Robert, I'm going to tell you, to us, what this sounds like with your description of them doing really advanced stuff. There's the term, a comedian's comedian. Mm-hmm. Comedians get what he's doing. It's with rhythm. I really start to think Sony is sort of the technology technologist. Only if you're really deep do you get what they're doing. You go, wow, man, that was groovy. But the rest of the world just goes, where are they going? All right, I'll buy that guy. Somebody else.
Mastered in 4K.
Yes.
Oh, jeez, stop that.
But that also incorporated their expanded color palette beyond the current Rec 709, and you know what? It was something else they kind of pushed along, but it just fell flat with consumers because it was a Sony only thing per se. And going forward, we're looking at things like bringing DCI P3 color space to the consumer side now, and I think that will prove to be much more popular. So we'll be approaching the color quality of commercial cinema in the home, hopefully later this year, with content that's appropriately authored. But yeah, I agree. I think Sony does amazing work with creating these ecosystems of playing with greater color palettes and greater resolution. And here's the whole end-to-end in terms of making that work. But if they can't make money doing it, it just won't be around. And unless you have a successful cell or smartphone line backing up your product development, it's a challenging environment nowadays to keep at it, building TVs and taking risks. And I wish they keep doing it. I hope they do. And otherwise, we're stuck with a bunch of it is a commoditized environment anyway, as it is. But still.
Yeah, I mean, you've made a good point earlier about nobody makes money really making displays. I mean, Sony's ecosystem is from the top down, right? They create the movies that are they do them in 4K, and they're looking for an entire range. Like you want to get Spider-Man in 4K, you want to see it the way it was really intended. Well, then you have to get a Sony display, and I think somewhat that's what they're planning on.
I will give them credit though. They have the best. They have the only, as far as I know, one of the few consumer 4K streaming products with their FMPX10 digital 4K media player, whatever it's called. That they recently opened up with a firmware update to allow it to work with any 4K TV now that supports the latest copy protection standard, HDCP 2.2. So if you made that investment and you were just looking for something to connect to it, there you go. At least that's one way I've seen Sony back off a little bit about being, you have to plug this into a Sony product, otherwise it just won't happen. So
yeah, I wasn't aware of that. That is good that they've done that, because typically you're right.
One thing they've done though. So it's still a pricey product for 4K distribution, but it is the best I've seen as far as quality goes so far. So.
All right. As we wrap up here, I'm going to see if I can't break the entire internet and see if I can't figure this out here. From our friends at actually it's core.org, O-R-G. What I'm showing on the screen here, if you go to studio.org, it's a beginner's level of virtual or visual coding. I'll put a link on the show page, but it's based off of Disney's Infinity characters, and if you're not familiar with Infinity, it's open architecture gaming where you buy these little characters, you put them on the platform, and you bring it up, and you can be Buzz Lightyear, you can be Captain Jack Sparrow, you can be Hero and Baymax from the movie, and this runs you through several different levels on how to code visually. And so what we're doing here is you say, okay, here, there we go, we're making the little guy run, and it takes you through several different levels on how to visually code. Now, is this hard coding? No. Is this lines and lines of HTML code? Absolutely not. And I'll be the first to admit that. However, it's a start, and it's a start as someone who looks at my kids as they grow up, and then their dad does what he does, right? And I look at trying to hire programmers and seeing where they're going to come from. This to me is a really great start to get kids interested, guys and girls, both interested at a young age. So the question to you, as my wonderful smart panel, Matt, we'll start with you. What other technologies, what other platforms are out there to get young people involved in coding at a young age?
That's a rough one. I don't know of many, say, cutting edge platforms that are, not based in the traditional methods of coding, and even, specifically from the web side of things. There's coding is almost disappearing for anyone but actual advanced users. This one is very, very cool and very cool to see. But outside of some of the, again, maybe some of the Apple products that allow kids to code little web apps and whatnot, there's very little. It seems to be one of those industries, at least to my knowledge, that you really have to almost jump in with both feet before you're really going to be able to get a good grounding on it. But also, my son isn't really at that level where he's starting to code yet.
Well, why not? He's what, 2 months old? So
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
6.5 weeks.
6 weeks, 2 months.
Oh, come on, he can do Python then.
Exactly. No, he can do. At 6 weeks, he can do Ruby on Rails at least.
Yeah, Ruby on Rails is it's a good little starter platform.
Well, you know what this is actually, and I'm going to say this is Mickey Bytes, a program called Scratch.
On the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, I can't. Well, no, not Raspberry Pi. It was made by MIT.
No, but if you buy a Raspberry Pi and you do the basic install, it comes with Scratch. But go ahead, George.
It looks just like it. So unless they're Disney and they don't care about sort of theme copyrights or whatever they call that, it looks just like. It looked like they put a Disney skin. They made a Mickey Byte over Scratch. Oh, yeah. But that's another one you were asking. There's Scratch, which is got a whole community. It's sort of an open source community of making things and sharing.
All right. So, Robert, from your standpoint, what's ways to get kids involved in technology at an early age?
I love the fact that Raspberry Pi includes something like that. I mean, that is $40 hardware you can buy on Amazon, and there's so much you can do with it in terms of like either a headless computer and running code that you can write yourself. Yep. The learning aspect of it, I think it's most important to focus on just making sure kids have access to the internet. Number one, an affordable access for everyone, because there are so many amazing resources online right now that you can visit to learn to code. Everything from Code Academy, code.org. I even want to say, Saul Khan's website, Khan Academy.
Yes.
Although not code specific, that is such a resource that's just free and available, and it lets you get hands-on. And with things like the Raspberry Pi community, where you can look and see the hardware it is and how you affect it with software, that to me is just awesome. And the resources, be it a YouTube video to the forums that evolve around these products and services, and it has never been a better time. I think it's simply a matter of exposing kids to the variety of sources out there. Start with the basics, give them the introduction to it. I think the Raspberry Pi demo would be ideal, because it's like, hey, look, here's something most people can afford, or a lot of people can afford, as far as the hardware goes. And then here are just reams of examples in terms of how to get started, in terms of actually either cut and pasting mode to finally getting your fingers dirty. And is that me?
No, that.
And just to getting more hands-on with actually writing and crafting, and starting simple too. And that's where I think the websites like Code Academy and Code.org do such a good job of getting you in. And if you want to take it further, where you get into everything from C++ to assembly code, if you want to go further down that path, but just having the basic concepts, even writing a web page from scratch, HTML or CSS now. Those are practical skills that you will use forever, especially as we're a more online, society, so to speak, and just having. But it all starts with that initial having good, affordable access to the internet, and nowadays high-speed access is a must. So, my own city is actually implementing downtown, taking some of the old classic signs around town and using those as points to install wireless hotspots.
Oh, wow.
And the thing I don't understand, though, is a lot of kids now are with mobile devices, and how you can do training of some kind on a mobile product to make it easier. Because if kids aren't walking around with a notebook or sitting at a workstation, coding, to me, I'd have to be in front of a workstation, preferably with a couple displays, to really learn as I'm trying to code and do things, so I can look in one window, see the results in the other, kind of thing. But there's a lot of ways of doing it, and there are a lot of great mobile experiences I've had with learning, even with like language learning, like Duolingo, where they gamify a way to learn a second language. If they can do something similar on a mobile side with the basic concepts of learning to program, I think that'll go a long way toward exposing more kids to it early on, and support your high schools too, and your grade schools. I haven't taken a tour of my local schools in a while, and I would hope that they're pushing that kind of learning as hard as possible, but it's something I'm less familiar with. I have to ask my friends with kids.
All right. Dawn, from your standpoint, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, building on what Robert just said, there are a lot of options out there. I know Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts both have technology engineer, and they built an acoustics lab with hands-on lab activities for brownies to go and take the acoustic lab and learn these programming skills and acoustic setup skills and get badges and get brownie points for doing it. Things like that are fantastic, Check with your local schools. I mean, granted, I'm not as young as Matt or kids that are brownies now, but part of the reason I'm sitting here as a woman in technology is, our era, we're the ones that learned to do basic programming in school. We would sit there in junior high and learn how to make things blink on those horrible, monochrome monitors. And then a couple years later, learning how to hand code HTML in Notepad.
Yep.
Like, I'm dating myself, but that kind of stuff really was cool. It was something that not everybody could do. It was awesome to learn. And those skills brought me to where I am now. So, just even if there's nothing in your area for schools or for brownies, Boy Scouts, any other youth activity, even if your local summer camp doesn't offer it, man, we're all tech people. We're all geeks. Go find a kid that has an interest and say, hey, if it's cool with your parents or your school, I'll come and show you some of this stuff because it's awesome. Give them an internship or, a free summer workshop, something. There are all ways that we can build not just the skills for programming, but the skills for technology, because Lord knows we all have a hard time hiring skilled tech people in the AV world. That's a way to do it. Build them young.
Yeah, and Robert made a good point with Khan Academy. Khan Academy is not just, if you've never heard of it, just go on Google and type in Khan Academy, because it's a fabulous resource in general if you want to learn about most anything. Also, iTunes University is a good resource as well, where they have generally... Go ahead.
Hacker spaces too. They've been springing up in my local area quite a bit, based either upon the Make scene with Make Magazine, or just individual, depending on either maybe you're into 3D printing side of things, or with just building individual electronic components using things like, be it Raspberry Pi or some of the other hardware that's very modifiable. And there's a lot of different aspects now where you can get more hands-on in local communities. It helps to live near a major city, but if you're out in the middle of nowhere, that's a whole different story. That's where I think then the internet access becomes a better player or a more key thing to have and be exposed to and be able to use that.
Well, that's a whole other conversation, right? If you are in a rural community, there's two sides of that. If you are in a rural community, the likelihood of you having high-speed internet is drastically reduced, and that's a whole nother conversation we can have. So, all right, guys. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. With us has been Miss AV Dawn from NetAV. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And where can people find you?
In a pinch, you can find me on Twitter at AVDawn. I'm also around AVNation. I'll be at AVNation at the booth, if not anywhere else, at the tweet up and stuff at Infocom. And of course, in NetAV, net-av.com. I'm 97% launched, our brand new website, so go check it out. And our brand new employee, I'm sure he's watching the show right now. But
go ahead and tell people who you're working with now.
Yeah, so at AV Grump, formerly at Mr. AV Dawn, as of the beginning of May, we'll be working at NetAV as well. So we're getting the band back together and gonna be working together for the foreseeable future. So looking forward to it.
Working with your husband, that's an interesting one. So we'll have to follow that one. Mr. George Tucker from World Stage, thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me on. Folks can find me, of course, here at AVNation on the various and sundry shows I produce. At Tucker Tuesday on Twitter and Commercial Integrator I write for. So you can go check them out there.
All right, thank you. Mr. Matt D. Scott, thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Where can people find you?
You can find me at Matt D. Scott or at Omega Audio Video, as well as OmegaAudioVideo.com.
Right.
Or on the porch.
Or on the porch, apparently, which is where he's sitting.
Hey.
So.
Hey, we finally got a day in the 70s with sun, so it was equal distances to my house or the office. The office doesn't have a deck. So
there you go.
I went home.
And he also writes for SCN magazine. So.
Yes, I write for SCN and all kinds of goodies.
Right. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Robert Heron from Heron Fidelity. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you very much. It was a pleasure hanging out with you guys today.
Thank you. And if anybody's interested in some of the stuff that you're doing, where would they find you?
Check out my website, heronfidelity.com, or follow me on Twitter at Robert Heron. And those are you can find everything else I'm doing through those portals. So
okay.
Feel free.
Very good. All right. My name is Tim Albright. Most likely don't follow me, but go by the website if you would, please. There's an awful lot of people that do an awful lot of cool things there. AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv. You will find this very program and a host of others. We have a brand new EdTech show coming down the pipeline next week, which is our education focused show, looking at college and higher ed for AV. We have a new Live Life coming down. And Dawn mentioned one just posted. Apparently, there you go.
And about RF mics.
See, that's what happens when you have the producer of the show on. He tells you these things. So,
new Live Life, new lighting guy coming down next week, and a new AV Crosstalk just posted.
All right, well there you go. See,
and a new AV social set to record in the next week, provided everyone's schedules stay clear.
See, Robert, I don't do anything here. They all just.
I was going to say the AV Tweeps hashtag is yours as well, isn't it?
Well, it's not. No,
we claim ownership.
We claim
okay,
ownership.
No, I mean, you can't really own it, but
yeah.
I follow it.
Truth be told, it was established by one Johnny Moda back a couple of years ago.
Oh, okay.
He still is one of those guys, but it was quickly absorbed and utilized by the AV integration industry. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I actually keep that on my feed, and it's a great resource and it's fun just to see what other people are doing, especially on the integrator side. That's a big part of what I do. I mean, I love calibration and display testing, but seeing how it all gets put together is awesome, and it keeps me in the loop.
Very cool. Yeah. So we do a thing. If you're in the Orlando area, come June. Was it 18th now? We're doing a tweet up where we have the folks that follow AV Tweeps. It's a networking event, get together. You don't have to be on Twitter if you're going to Infocom, but come by. We have a little room there, W223A, got that ingrained in my head now. At the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, there on International Drive.
Free food, free drinks.
Free food and free drinks, and a big giant.
And fabulous company.
Some of them are fabulous.
We're all a little fabulous, Tim. Let's admit it.
Okay, a little fabulous.
Okay, I'm a little fabulous. All right. But that's going to be it to it. AVNation.tv, AVNation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. This has been AV Week.